Hi everyone, I'm back with another edition of the American Chess Magazine puzzle calendar. Let's get into the puzzles. This was the puzzle for Thursday, July 6th. It was composed by Geza Dostkan in the year 1940. Again, all the puzzles in this series are white to move, mate in 2. If you want to try to solve this puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. For me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 7 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 4 out of 5. So here, Black's king is stuck in the center, obviously, but unfortunately, any attempts by White to even try to threaten checkmate kind of fall short. For example, if queen to f7, trying to threaten queen to e6 at some point, then the problem is that Black simply plays knight d takes c5. Now the e6 square is covered, and f6 is guarded by the knight. If White tries to play knight c4, which might have worked before, unfortunately now king takes f5. The reason that knight c4 didn't work in the beginning was because of king to d5. Also, rook takes e4 is guarded by the queen. Bishop takes f4 is guarded by the rook. So all in all, it looks like White doesn't really have anything much. Now, White has two problems to solve. One is that they need a way to try to give mate. That's the biggest one, obviously. And the second one is that Black has this one annoying defensive move, or at least it was really annoying for me, which is queen takes b4. Because, let me get rid of all these other arrows. The thing is that queen takes b4 gets rid of one of White's key attackers, and the queen wasn't really guarding anything, so it's hard to make some sort of zugzwang mate work. I tried, for example, another way to try to give mate is rook to e8, threatening king to d8. However, here the problem is queen takes b4, not queen takes b4 because king to d8 is checkmate. Here, Black has the option of playing knight takes c5 again, because now king to d8, bishop e6 is blocking. And again, knight c4 fails because king to d5, the rook is no longer covering this square. If White tries to play king to f7 immediately, threatening rook to e8, then the problem is that queen b3 check, and Black has delayed the mate for another move. Therefore, White has to find a different way to give mate. Then I realized that after queen takes b4, the queen was guarding this knight. However, we can try block that with knight to d4. Also, this move comes with the benefit of threatening queen to f5. If queen takes b4, then queen takes e4 is mate. And Black has to find a different way to stop queen to f5. There's a number of ways to try to do this. First of all, the f-pawn is pinned, so f takes e3, opening the rook isn't possible. If Black tries to play knight takes c5 to allow the bishop to guard the f5 square, then here White can finally play knight to c4 mate because the rook is open and the queen is still guarding f5. If Black tries to play any other knight move, that's still met by knight to c4. If knight to b6, guarding the c4 square, then here White can play the move knight takes c6 because the rook has been blocked. After knight d4, if Black tries to move this knight away, using the queen to guard the f5 square, then here White can play not knight to c4 because the d4 knight is still hanging, but instead knight to g4 because the now Black can no longer play king to d5 because the bishop is guarding the square. If Black tries to play knight f2, guarding the g4 square and also the f5 square, then here White can play knight to f3 because the rook is not able to guard the square anymore. Basically, knight d4 barely works, but luckily all of Black's defenses fail. I'm pretty sure I might have missed one or two of Black's defenses. You can let me know in the comments below. But all in all, White's starting queen f5, and any way Black tries to defend this will be met by a different checkmate and won by White. This was the puzzle for Friday, July 7th. It was composed by Aladar Sime Molnar in the year 1921. For me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 6 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 4.5 out of 5. Here, I immediately thought of trying to bring my queen in, some queen d5 or queen c5. It's important to note that the d-pawn is being pinned by the rook. But unfortunately, White's not even threatening anything here. After Black plays something random, if queen c5 or queen d5, then the king simply takes the knight. I couldn't really see any other way to try to give some sort of check. There's no way to bring White's pieces closer. For example, if the bishop moves, then Black simply has e2 check. Then I realized, though, that Black's pieces and pawns are all suspiciously short on legal moves. Even though Black has a lot of material, most of it can't move anywhere. And for the ones that are not being outright blockaded, they can't really move because they're tied to other duties. If this knight on e1 moves, then bishop f3 is checkmate. If the light square bishop moves, then White has rook to c5. If the knight moves, then White has rook to b6. And finally, if bishop to e5, then White has the option of playing then white can play knight takes e5 mate. However, the thing is that even though black technically can't move if it was their turn and white would have mate in 2, the problem is that it's hard to move any of white's pieces and not give black any meaningful waiting moves. For example, if this rook moves, then the h-pawn can move. If the queen moves, then the g-pawn can move. If the bishop moves, then the e-pawn can move. If the king moves, the d-pawn, well, the king can't move, there's no legal moves. And if the knight moves, this is the obviously more hopeful one, then the problem is that bishop f3 would no longer be checkmate because the king can take. So after black plays knight d3, they've successfully avoided mate in 2. Other options include for white to move the d7 knight, but unfortunately this knight was key to protecting the b6 square. So after black plays knight to b6, conveniently also guarding the d7 square, then rook takes b6 is no longer a checkmate. So therefore we land on the only piece that can still move, which is the rook on b5. However, this rook was key to threatening rook c5 checkmate. For example, if white plays rook to b4, then black can simply play the move bishop to e5. Now if knight takes e5, then the king can run. And white's previous idea against bishop e5, remember in this position, was to play knight takes, and that no longer works. The rook was controlling the c5 square, now it's not. If white tries to play queen to c4, then again the knight is hanging. So white has to search for a different place to move the rook, and the best place to move that is rook to b1. Now after rook b1, bishop e5, then queen takes a4 is mate, and all of the previous moves, all of the previous arrows still hold true. If the knight moves, then rook b6. If this knight moves, then bishop to f3 because the d-pawn is pinned, so it cannot block. And black has no other legal moves, therefore white will be successfully giving a zugzwang mate in 2. This is the puzzle for this weekend, July 8th through 9th. It was composed by Philip Williams in the year 1900. For me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 5 out of 5. My immediate thought was to play bishop takes f6, threatening bishop takes g5. But here I noticed something interesting. If black moves the rook anywhere, then white has rook to e2 mate. If rook to d4, then white has queen takes d4 mate. If rook to d2 guarding e2, then white has rook to f3. If the bishop takes, then white has queen to f4. If bishop to h6, then white has queen takes e6 because the bishop is guarding d4. If black plays h2, then knight g2 is mate, or bishop takes g5. Unfortunately, the problem with bishop takes f6, as I eventually realized, is rook to d7 check, prolonging the mate. But bishop takes f6, looking at these variations, caused me to realize something interesting. Black, again, has a shortage of moves that don't lead to mate. So again, this lends to the idea of zugzwang checkmate. For example, here if black plays f5, then white is controlling the d4 square through the bishop. Therefore, white can maybe have some queen c1 ideas. Or actually, after f5, white even has the option of immediately playing queen takes e6 because the king can no longer run to the d4 square. If black tries bishop to h6, then white has bishop takes. If bishop to f4, then queen takes. If pawn h2, then knight g2. If the rook moves to most places, then rook to e2. Otherwise, for example, against something like rook to d2, then white has rook to f3. And if rook to d4, then white has queen to e2. Lots of arrows, but the basic idea is that black can't really move anywhere. Otherwise, white will be able to give mate. But then the problem is, of course, how does white make a move to simply pass the turn to black? If the bishop moves, then black has this annoying check, as realized in the bishop takes f6 variation. If the rook moves somewhere, then black's king has a lot of places to run now. And the rook was key to threatening a lot of mates, so it doesn't really feel safe to move the rook. If the knight moves, then obviously the rook hangs. And the queen is also so important, it has so many squares it might need to run to, that we don't really want to move the queen. Therefore, the only possible piece to move is the king, and king g6 luckily does the job. If the bishop moves, then queen to f4. If bishop h6, then bishop takes. And it's basically just a rundown of all the other variations we've seen in the previous diagram. Rook d6, then rook to e2. If pawn to f5, then here, because the bishop is controlling d4, white has queen to c1. Actually, the king can run to e4. So against f5, the correct variation, keeping in mind that the bishop is controlling this d4 square, is actually to play the move queen takes e6. If black plays pawn to e5 instead, then white has knight to f5. If h2, then knight g2. The king can't run, and I think I've covered all of black's legal moves. White will be giving mate on the next turn. So those are the puzzles for this half week, with two of the puzzles having Zugzwang checkmate as their main idea. We've seen some themes that we've already seen in previous videos before. There was the idea of, all I need to do is pass the turn, but all of my pieces are already doing so much, so how can I possibly pass the move? Then you have to find the piece that isn't doing much and use that to make the waiting move. So I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. And that's all for today. Bye!